So sulfur is also a necessary nutrient and a necessary element. For example, it is found within our protein structure. But interestingly, it is not generally a limiting nutrient. So there is abundant amounts of sulfur in our environment so that it's not going to limit, say, for example, the growth of plants like nitrogen and phosphorus might. So when we look at the sulfur cycle, there's very little in the atmosphere. Most is actually stored in the ocean and in the ocean sediments. So most is found in the ocean and ocean sediments. When we look at its flows, we can see that one of the major ways that it gets into the atmosphere, even though there's very little of it in the atmosphere, is through sea spray. So isn't that interesting that sea spray can lift and move that sulfur up into our atmosphere? We also have volcanoes. So volcanoes can release sulfur into the atmosphere. We also have erosion, so wind erosion. So we have these sediments that undergo very slow geological processes of like being uplifted to the surface. And then winds can take that up and put it into the atmosphere. We also have the ability to take it up into plants, for example, and then during death and decay, it is released back into the soil. So one of the, or actually there's two things that you might have heard of that have lots of sulfur in them. And this would be in pyrite, which is fool's gold, and also in gypsum, like the gypsum that is used to produce drywall. So this would be a place that they are stored. So this stores the sulfur and, for example, during erosion, it can be released into the water, into the soil. So when we look at the ways that we disrupt this cycle, we can see that the burning of fossil fuels, like the burning of coal. So coal is an example of a fossil fuel that releases CO2, but it can also release sulfur oxides into the atmosphere. And so we have a problem with this because it combines with water and can cause acid rain. So we could have acid rain being a byproduct of producing too much sulfur and releasing it into the atmosphere. The other interesting thing about this is that oftentimes excessive amounts of sulfur are created during the mining process. So we have what is called acid mine drainage. So when people go in and they mine for copper or lead or zinc, oftentimes they leave behind a pile of rubble. And when that is referred to as the mine tailings, and they don't clean it up, they just leave it there. And then when it mixes with the water, it can release kind of sulfur, can be released, and it can be in a form of a acid. And so we can see here that this is an example of acid mine drain off that is flowing into a river, and it can cause massive death of the ecosystem when it does this. And so those would be two of the human impacts on the sulfur cycle.